Hi guys, welcome to 30 Days to Your First Website Design, a Tuts Plus premium course. My name's Ian Yates. That's me there with some familiar faces. And I look after web design tuts for the guys at Envato. I'm going to be presenting this course, taking you through things step by step. Now we have a lot to cover and we'll be talking about a lot of the basics, but even if you're not a total novice, there'll be plenty to take on board which can refresh your memory or smooth out some of the bad habits which inevitably form over the course of time. We're going to be working towards a website design. There it is. But it's worth noting that this isn't a Photoshop, HTML, CSS walkthrough. We will cover a lot of that, but more importantly, this course aims to get you thinking about the process of designing a website. We're going to break things up into 5 sections. Firstly, there'll be planning, where we'll look at your clients and users, and that will lead us into usability. We'll look at selecting content and then wrap up with a video about goals. Our second section will focus on design concepts, beginning with a few guidelines, inspiration, style and themes, conceptual sketching, grids and layout, the all-important anatomy of a web page, and lastly white space. And there's a reason for that piece of cheese being there, which you'll find out later. We'll then move on to the nuts and bolts of web design by looking at site elements, background textures, navigation, typography, features sections, forms and the footer. Then section 4 will lead us into prepping our design. It's a relatively brief section comprised of just 3 videos. We'll look at deciding what should be handled with CSS, and then we'll look into sprite sheets, and lastly organization. The final section, section 5, will concentrate on implementing your design. We're going to choose our applications, look at the web standards model, then we'll cover our markup and talk a bit about semantics. Then we'll move on to styling our markup before looking at browsers, and then we'll have a couple of videos on JavaScript behavior. Lastly, we'll perform some cross-browser testing before finally implementing Google Analytics. Now there's a lot to take in, but we'll go about things at a relaxed pace and the final result will make it all worthwhile. Okay, make yourself a coffee or a cup of tea and let's get going. Hi guys, welcome back to 30 Days to Your First Website Design, a Tuts Plus premium course. My name is Ian Yates and today we're going to quickly look at planning. We're going to start by asking a simple question. What is web design? Well, the answer is easy, isn't it? Web design is pouring the internet for inspiration and then opening a graphics application like Photoshop or Fireworks, designing something pretty and then building it for a web browser, correct? No, of course it isn't. Web design is this. It's an iceberg. See, there's a little penguin there just to prove it. Now this, what you're looking at here, is the tip of the iceberg, and that's what we've just discussed. This is the fun bit in many people's eyes. It's the HTML and the CSS. The tip of the iceberg is the building of the website. As you'll have probably gathered from this brilliant metaphor, there's a great deal of the process hidden under the surface. And there it is. Now that is your planning. Web design is planning. It's about knowing your choices and making decisions. Get those right and you'll have to spend relatively little time buried in graphics and code. Now it's important to realize there's very little right or wrong in web design. Obvious extremes there being the exception, but there's a great deal of reaction and opinion, and that in a sense is where right and wrong comes from. It's people's opinions which dictate how they deal with your site and ultimately therefore its success. Now when you're designing a website, you're going to be catering for several parties. There's yourself, the designer. There's more than likely going to be a client whose business interests you're representing. And then ultimately there's the ever important end user. Now each of these 3 have different motives and desires, and it's your job to see that everybody's content with the final result. And that can be awkward, but planning properly will make the process as easy as possible. Now, during this series, we're going to be building a website. It's going to be for a fictional corporate website. So everything that we look at in terms of theory, we're now going to be looking at in relation to that site. So the important thing to take away from this first section is that planning is crucial. Plan big, execute small, as this brilliant diagram demonstrates. It's a pie. Well, it was supposed to be a pie. It looks a bit more like cheese, but you get the idea. Now, while you're planning, you're going to need to get to know your website. So ask yourself questions. Questions like, what are the site's goals? Now, in our case, for our fictional corporate website, we're building a site on behalf of a small business, a business who wants people to understand what it does and to ultimately employ its services. That's going to be our main goal. Now, who's going to be using the site? Again, in our case, clients, existing clients, new clients, and prospective clients. People who will potentially be employing the services of our fictitious company. So what do we expect of these people when they visit the site? At the very least, we want them to go away with the brand firmly embedded in their brains. Perhaps they'll take the message elsewhere and tell someone else about the company. Ideally, we want users to visit the site, get full awareness of what the company is and what it does, and then directly get in touch. So what could potentially get in the way of that? Well, this is a huge topic in itself. But in our case, anything which is going to prevent the user from understanding the site, from understanding the company, anything which is going to distract them and send them elsewhere, or worse, anything which presents the company in a negative light, those are going to be our problems. Those could get in the way of us reaching our goals with this website. Now, in order to properly get an accurate answer to these answers, you're going to need to research properly, but remember to stay flexible. Things change, and you're going to be using a lot of educated assumptions. Now, it doesn't matter how you plan. It doesn't matter whether you're going to use elaborate flowcharts, whether you're a fan of sketching in a Moleskine book, or whether you're going to be planning using lipstick on the mirror of the ladies' toilets in a restaurant. Doesn't matter. Get your ideas and your concepts clear, and the build time will be reduced dramatically. Now, for further reading, I can highly recommend you visit Web Design Tuts. Brilliant site, and I'm going to be sending you back there a great deal during this series because there's an awful lot of content which is going to be backing up pretty much everything I talk about. Now, this particular article is by Brandon, the former editor. It's called Planning Ahead, Ways to Improve Your Web Design Workflow, and it touches upon quite a number of the things that we've just discussed now. Now, we're going to look deeper into planning during the next few sections of this series. Next time on 30 Days to Your First Website Design, we're going to cover usability. This is Ian Yates, and from all of us here at Tuts Plus, thank you very much for listening. Hey guys, welcome back to 30 Days to Your First Website Design, a Tuts Plus premium course. I'm Ian Yates, and today we're going to look further into the planning aspect of things by examining usability. Let's firstly take a look at what we'll be covering in this video. Firstly, we're going to ask ourselves, what is usability? That's going to take us on to familiarity in web design, ultimately then on to user experience, and finally empathy, putting yourself in the shoes of others. And before we stop and jump into the next video, I'm going to give you a little assignment. Okay, so we'll begin with asking our question, what is usability? It can apply to many aspects of life, but it's a term you're going to hear thrown around quite often in web design, and it all boils down to common sense. Usability, in our case, describes the ease of use of a website. Another word you're going to hear a lot of is intuitive. Something which is used intuitively requires no real forethought. Using it is instinctive, easy, it's usable. Familiar interfaces are great examples of good usability. Tabs, for example. We started to think of these as a web design tool, but they originate, of course, from the tabs on files in an office. We're already familiar with using them in real life, so using them as a means of navigation on a website feels intuitive. You'll find them in websites, in applications, they're present in browsers, and for good reason. Now, a website is a vehicle. It's used to perform a function, to convey a message or communicate ideas, and if it does this well, the user will barely even notice the site itself. At the point when a user becomes conscious of what they're doing, starts thinking about how they should be behaving on a website, there's a chance you're going to lose their attention. They become distracted by the how, when really all they should be concerned with is the what. Now, usability isn't universal. What works well for one site doesn't necessarily work well for another. It's entirely reliant on each individual, such as this chap, which is why it's so important to determine who your users are when planning a website. By generalizing your user group, you can approximate their behavior, their desires, their motives, and then get a better idea of how they will deal with your website. We're talking about user experience. When designing a site for your user, you're designing his or her experience. Whereas you, the designer, may analyze a site by its aesthetics or its clever use of JavaScript, and the client might judge a site simply by how much cash it generates, the end user really shouldn't be assessing anything at all. They should just be experiencing it. So who are our users? Well, we're going to need to ask ourselves some questions, such as, for example, how old are they? We're going to need to cater for their visual tastes in order to draw them in, but we may also need to consider their individual usage needs. Perhaps we're dealing with the elderly or the young, in which case font size could be crucial. Where are they from? For example, we're still a long way from global equality where internet is concerned, and some nations are far less accustomed to making online transactions than others. Trust is hugely important when encouraging somebody to tap in their credit card details. Not all countries are like the US, where we can assume a certain level of e-commerce savvy. How will they use a site? Now, increasingly these days, we have to consider the devices our site will be viewed on. That nice jQuery drop-down menu you've built, are you sure it works okay on a touchscreen tablet? If it doesn't, then you're preventing users from accessing crucial navigational elements of your site. Not great on the usability scale. Now, it's all very well saying know your users, but how do we actually do this? Well, you're going to need to practice empathy, putting yourself in the shoes of others. This great article on Web Design Tuts by Paul Boag covers the forgotten skill of doing just that. He talks about empathy in terms of your colleagues, your clients, your users. It's a great article. I suggest you go and check it out. Now, it's classic web designer behavior, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone, to be defensive of your work, to get wound up and irritated by people who see your design differently. It took me a long time to accept that my wife's perception of my design is just as valid as anybody else's. So test your designs on different people, accept constructive criticism, and soon you'll become accustomed to designing through the eyes of a user. Now, while we're on the subject of further reading, I can also recommend you check out Steve Krug's Don't Make Me Think. It's the seminal usability reference, and it makes common sense really seem like common sense. Great book. Go and check it out. And lastly, I'm going to ask you to ask yourself some questions so we can continue to develop our corporate website theme. So have a look at these questions before we jump onto the next video. For example, who is potentially going to be using our site? What will they expect to gain from doing so? And what do we expect from them whilst they're there? Give those questions some thought, and then we can move on to the next section. Next time on 30 Days to Your First Website Design, we're going to look at content. This is Ian Yates, and again from all of us here at Tuts Plus, thank you for listening. Hey guys, welcome back to 30 Days to Your First Website Design. a Tuts Plus premium course. I'm Ian Yates, and today we're going to continue with the theory section of this series by looking at content. Let's take a quick look at what we're going to be covering in this video. That's quite a straightforward one, this one. We're first going to take some examples of what we should be including before we look at some examples of what we shouldn't. And then typically before we jump into the next video, I'm going to set you an assignment. Okay, let's look at the first point then. What should we include? Well, this is another one of those lovely subjective questions. What we should or shouldn't include is, of course, entirely down to the type of site we're designing. A blog, a landing page, a portfolio, a web shop, they all need completely different types of content. There are, however, common elements which we can usually apply across the board. Firstly, arguably most importantly, is identity. From the moment someone enters your website, they should know who or what they're dealing with. So make sure there's at least some kind of logo or branding. GetFinch.com is a great example of how to do this without beating around the bush. No messing about. A subtler and more common approach can be seen on the Clear Left website. Logo in the top left, where the eye usually enters the screen. We'll talk about that more later in the series. Backed up by branding colours. Our logos are often located in the top left, and they usually serve as links back to the home page. This is what we call a convention, an aspect of web design which people have come to expect over time. And that's also something we're going to touch upon later in the series. Excuse me. Next up, you'll more often than not need to include primary navigation, and usually immediately visible somewhere above the fold being the area of a site visible without having to scroll. Now, the website we're going to be working on is going to be a corporate website. We're going to need to make sure that our brand is clear, that our contact information is readily available, and that our message is delivered. And we could deliver that message with straplines, mantras, perhaps even testimonials from happy customers. We'll also have secondary content. Now, that might not be in your face upon arriving, but can be found if needed, such as an About Us page, for example. Now, in order to analyse specifically what we want to include, we'll first have to clarify our goals, and we'll be looking at those during the next video. For now though, let's look a little further into what we shouldn't be including. Well, part of what we should have in our website is meaningful content, and while the content itself might not be your responsibility, it will likely be down to a copywriter or the client, you do have responsibility for displaying it properly. People, and that includes you, tend to scan web pages, not read them from start to finish. What you should therefore avoid including is masses of unnecessary content. Keep the body text to the point so that visitors aren't turned off by huge paragraphs and long lines of text. If they're looking for more detailed information, make it easy for them to go and find it. Secondly, avoid anything which can be counted as visual noise. Anything which distracts the user from performing whatever action you expect of them. MrBottles.com is an extreme example here, but visual noise can be as subtle as unnecessary images or striking text on an advert. Now that leads me to my next point, adverts. If a website is funded partially or wholly through ad revenue, you'll need to find somewhere for those ads to live. They need to be a valid part of the site, otherwise nobody's going to click them and they won't generate any income. But make sure they don't take precedence over the genuine content of the website. Lastly, and this may sound obvious, don't include anything for the sake of it. Don't fill the footer with social links if the client doesn't have any use for them, and don't animate the logo just because you can. Okay, it's time for some further reading. I want you to take a look at this article on minimalist web design by Kurt Ziegler. It's another great web design tuts article, and in it he talks about removing clutter, which elaborates further on what we just talked about with visual noise. Now, as a little assignment before you jump into the next video, I want you to think about our corporate website and ask yourself the following questions. What is it you want the users to see when they arrive on the site? Secondly, what do you believe should be the secondary content on our website? That's it, simple as that. Okay, next time on 30 Days to Your First Website Design, we're going to be looking at goals. This is Ian Yates, and from all of us here at Tuts Plus, thanks again for listening. Hey guys, welcome back to 30 Days to Your First Website Design, a Tuts Plus premium course. I'm Ian Yates, and today we're going to complete our coverage of planning by looking at goals. Let's first take a quick look at what we're going to be covering in this video. We're going to begin by defining business goals, and then we're going to look at measuring success by using those goals before we add a little bit of clarity to the whole lot. And then lastly, as usual, I'm going to set a little assignment before we jump into the next video. Now, we're going to play Cupid today and do some matchmaking. No, we're not suddenly designing an online dating service. We're still looking at our corporate website. But we've mentioned a couple of times that there are several players involved in this whole process. There's yourself, the client, and the targeted users. Well, your website has to fulfill one essential role, and that is aligning the user's desires with the client's requirements. To understand how we match these two up, we need to have a clear idea of our client's goals. Without clear business goals, we can't specify the site's goals, we've nothing to aim for, and therefore nothing by which to measure our success. Let's have a look at some examples of specific business goals. First up, generating new leads. Now in this case, the site would be acting as a marketing tool, aiming to promote something and gather responses from users. Success would be measured by the acquisition of new leads and new customers. Or then there's the completing of online sales. E-commerce goals are fairly clear. The site would exist to sell products and handle the purchasing. Success could be measured in terms of sales figures and cold hard cash. Then there's providing news. Perhaps you're focused on a blog. Goals in this case would be to maintain high quality articles and reach as wide an audience as possible. You want people to read your material and hear your opinions. Success could be measured by the gathering of subscription numbers via a newsletter, social followers, even paying members. Then our last example is building a brand, in which case consolidating the presence of a new or existing brand would be the business goal. Now, measuring the value of successful branding is difficult as it affects all aspects of business. Solid identity sees all manner of gains within an organization, but one measurement of success could be the length of time users spend on your site. The term bounce rate refers to the number of users visiting your site but then leaving before having explored further. One goal when building a brand could be to minimize your site's bounce rate. Now your site may also have secondary goals, or even tertiary goals. If it's an e-commerce project, you'd ideally like to see people leave as happy customers having completed a transaction. If those goals aren't reached, you'd need to investigate why, but in the meantime, you'd perhaps want some other goals to be achieved. You'd at least want visitors to remember your site, so them signing up to your newsletter would be a suitable secondary goal. Now it's important that we're clear about our goals. Ambiguity will only lead to assumptions and then confusion and perhaps even mess up working relationships. Daniel Ritzenhaler, I think I pronounced that correctly, hits upon a great technique in his A List Apart article on taking the guesswork out of design. He breaks down the setting out of goals into this simple equation. We want to, because, so that. Now, using this straightforward formula removes any vagueness from your goals. Let's apply it to one of our previous examples, the blog example. We want to write 5 quality blog posts per month because we want to be taken seriously amongst our peers so that we can build a community of followers. See how well that cleared things up? Now, moving on to some more additional reading, let's look at goal achievement. Google Analytics offers some great methods for measuring successful goal conversion, and we'll be covering analytics later in the series. But in the meantime, this article is one of mine, and it looks at converting your goals. It goes into some detail about what conversion means, talks about optimizing conversion, and then looks at Google Analytics and how it can help you track your goal achievements. Okay, it's assignment time again. So before you jump into the next video, I have a simple task for you to think about whilst you're planning our corporate website. I want you to think of our client's primary goal and place it into context as we did earlier with the blog example. We want to, because, so that. Alright, have fun with that. Next time on 30 Days to Your First Website Design, we're going to start looking at design concepts. This is Ian Yates, and from all of us here at Tuts Plus, thanks again for listening. Hey guys, welcome back to 30 Days to Your First Website Design, a Tuts Plus premium course. I'm Ian Yates, and congratulations are in order. You've completed the planning workflow section of the series. Well done. So now we're going to move on to some meaty design concepts. Now this screencast is a little bit different. It just serves as a quick welcome to the design theory section. I'm going to wag my finger at you. Before we jump into design concepts, I'm going to list 3 don'ts. Number 1, don't copy someone else's work. You're surrounded by influential design during every minute of the day, so it's inevitable you're going to take lessons and inspiration away from that. Inspiration can be defined as being mentally stimulated to create something. Plagiarism is when someone recreates or imitates an original piece of work. Copying someone's work does them no justice, it could actually lead to legal trouble, but almost more importantly, it does the copier no favours either. There's a good chance that what's being copied isn't even suitable for the copier's objectives. We're going to look into design decision making in order to tailor our designs to our own needs. Number 2, don't work backwards from a foregone conclusion. You may have a beautiful looking site in your mind's eye, a good start you think, and it's sometimes easier to deal with that than a terrifying blank canvas, but don't try and force your design to fit this attractive vision. Build from the ground up. Lastly, number 3, don't use all available bells and whistles just because you can. It's logical that you'll see the success of some websites and themes and try and recreate that success by including similar tricks. jQuery slideshows, Twitter feeds, Flickr feeds, animated menus, whatever, but don't be fooled into thinking that those are the reasons behind a design's success. Begin at the beginning, then if your design warrants them, use the extra flourishes to enhance your work. Now, as this video was a little bit different, there's no real assignment this time, but I do have more Web Design Tuts recommended reading for you. Check out Be Inspired But Don't Copy by Connor Turnbull. He puts forward some compelling arguments and talks about the difference between copying and being inspired. Alright, lecture over. Next time on 30 Days to Your First Website Design, we're going to take this lesson a little bit further and examine inspiration. This is Ian Yates, and from all of us here at Tuts Plus, thanks for listening. Hi guys, welcome back to 30 Days to Your First Website Design, a Tuts Plus premium course. I'm Ian Yates, and today we're going to begin our design concept section by looking at inspiration. First, let's have a look at what we're going to be covering in this video. Well, we're going to begin with that horrible aspect of any design project, designer's block. Then that's going to lead into some useful sources of inspiration, after which we'll look at communities. And then, before we jump into the next video, I'm going to set you a little assignment. So, let's get started. Here, what is that? Oh, it's a blank page. Phew. That's better. I always find it's best to disrupt a blank page with something, just to get me over that first hurdle. To get past the dreaded designer's block, some folk find it useful to get some fresh air or make a cup of coffee, even have a bath, although that's a weird one. At a certain point though, you have to get down and dirty with design. So where should you be drawing your inspiration from? All designers have their own methods of beginning a project, so let's look at various forms of inspiration. Now this is usually going to be down to personal taste. The various resources you find yourself browsing probably appeal to you personally. You certainly admire